So we're a few weeks removed from what is probably going to go down as the biggest rap beef ever. And I think it's pretty safe to say it's over, even though there are certain things that make me suspect that there may be around two. But for the most part, it's pretty safe to say that it's over. And it's pretty safe to say that Kendrick Lamar won the beef against Drake. But I wanted to explore what I think Drake could have done differently in this battle, and also what I think Kendrick did right in this battle. And then I also wanted to kind of think about, if Drake had done it differently, was there ever really a chance that he could have won? Like, was this inevitable, or was there a way that he could have somehow evaded, the loss that he ended up taking? Now, if you're somebody who's like a stan of Drake or a stan of Kendrick, this probably isn't the video for you. I'm not really trying to pick a side. I really don't care. Like, to me, I just wanted to watch an interesting battle. And it was, to me, a very fascinating battle for many reasons. But again, I want to get into everything now. So there's a saying that I came up with while watching the battle play out. And the saying goes, all wars can be won in hindsight. One more time, the saying goes, all wars can be won in hindsight, which is basically just a remix of the phrase hindsight is 2020, but it's meant to be like a double meaning. Not only saying that hindsight is 2020, but also saying that in the beginning of the battle, you may have a better chance winning if you try to predict and prepare for all scenarios, try to think as far as ahead as possible. And so now, when I look at the way this battle turned out, and when I look back at a bunch of different battles, a bunch of different notable battles that played out over the years, especially with Drake, one thing I kind of noticed was the main things that kind of factor into what can make a successful diss campaign or an unsuccessful one. And so I got kind of bored the other day when I was kind of thinking about this, and I made two Venn diagrams that I want to put up on the screen, just kind of showing like the two tiers of ammo that I believe factors into a successful diss record camp slash diss campaign, right? So, like I said, I wanted to make a Venn diagram that was a visual representation to kind of explain what I mean by these things. And also one thing I noticed is that a lot of these different factors, I think, kind of melt into each other, which is why I thought it was best to make a Venn diagram of it. But in tier one of like disc record ammo, I listed T, or like gossip, like gossip culture and all that, facts, hit making ability, and lyrical prowess. Which, you would think lyrical prowess was like the most important one, but it matters, but not as much as these other ones, believe it or not. But like I said, T is, of course, another way people say gossip, whatever you want to call gossip. This is where like the shock value comes in, because in this day and age, and really it's always been like this when you look back at it, it's always a question of who can put out the most earth shattering gossip that can sort of change how you view the artist who's being, talked about. Now, like I said, when you look back, spilling tea and all that, that's always been a common thing on diss tracks. But now it's gotten a little risky, because putting that sort of shade room content onto a diss track, it can work, but at the same time, depending on who you are in the situation, you're gonna now be saddled with like the burden of truth. Like you need to somehow prove that you're not just making this up. Depending on who you are, some people, nobody cares. Like, if they just throw out some nonsense, people will believe it no matter what. The next factor in this first tier that I listed was facts. It's pretty self-explanatory. When someone drops a diss record and they put some facts out there that we all know it's true, but also can, it's just still just kind of makes the other artists look and it looked bad, I guess. Just not put them in a light that's not that appealing, I guess is the best way to say it. So the next one I got in the tier is the hit making factor, which again in this era is much more important than ever because if you can make a hit record and then just so happen to diss people on it, we've seen that work several times now. So that's a major advantage to have in the battle. And last one, like I said, was lyrical prowess. Just basically, can you just showcase that you're just flat out just a better rapper than the other person? Now, in the second tier, I have social media savviness, your track record as an artist, and kind of, I guess you could say your branding and how people see you, schoolyard disses, and the factor of who people are rooting for, like who are people rooting to win. The whole who people are rooting for factor is important because the court of public opinion is probably gonna like one person more than the other for whatever reason. Like that, it just kind of plays out like that. Schoolyard disses also I feel is pretty self-explanatory. It's just pretty much when people throw out disses that are kind of immature, but it still kind of works. It's just like when Nas on Ether was saying that Jay-Z had like he said that he had like D sucking lips. Like that's something you would expect like a 10-year-old to say, but in the context of that battle, it still worked at the end of the day. So social media savviness, I definitely think that's a new factor in rap beefs now compared to previous generations because previous generations didn't have to think about social media. But now if a really good social media campaign could come into play to make an artist look bad, that's gonna help. That alone could help you win the battle. And was that all of them? Yeah, that was all of the ones for like tier two. So first, I wanted to go back and look at Drake versus Meek Mill as another example of the tiers that I just referenced and the factors. So as far as strategy, it's clear as day that Meek Mill shot himself in the foot pretty much right out the gate. All Meek really had to do to give himself the one up in that beef was not go on Twitter. If he would have just kept everything to himself, spent a couple of days or weeks crafting a really good diss song, and then put out the diss song in addition to the reference tracks of Quentin Miller, I think that would have like made a world of a difference because people it would have just caught people off guard. It could have been a dope song, and it would have already put Drake in a position where he was backed up into a corner. But Meek Mill approached the situation completely wrong. He ranted on social media with all his ammo, threw it out there, and then Drake was able to flip everything right back on him because as far as when you go back to tier two, social media savviness, he used he used Meek's tendency to go on Twitter against him. And obviously we all know the infamous line, trigger fingers turn to Twitter fingers. So now that regardless of it being true, that kind of took away from the sting of Meek talking on social media. Like it just made him kind of look bad. And then also you had who people were rooting for. Now, if Meek had come out properly with a diss song first, I feel like people would have been on Meek's side. But because he did it in a sloppy way and Drake went on the aggressive immediately with charged up and back to back, it made people instantly shift and root for Drake instead. Then also Drake had, again, even in lyrical prowess, in back to back, it was a well written diss song. It was a solid diss song. Even Charged Up was pretty solid. And then also obviously hit making ability back to back was like a hit song. As far as like the whole Nicki and Meek angle, I feel like that kind of is a blend between facts and like tea/gossip culture, where Drake was obviously saying, "Hey, is that a world tour or your girls tour?" Which is now obviously making him look bad. And I don't remember if there was a whole lot of schoolyard dishes in back to back. I don't think there was really. It it was more so just that. By the time Meek responded, it was already dead in the water. So that was kind of an easy win for Drake. But when Drake and Pusha T came around, when their soul situation played out, that was a little more trickier. Pusha T came out and baited him with, which is what Meek should have done, but Pusha T baited him with Infrared. Drake came out with Duppy Freestyle, which I think was a very dope diss song. It was, as far as lyrical prowess goes, it was a very well put together diss. I feel like it could have been a hit, but I don't know. People just didn't feel it like that. He did drop some facts in there by questioning Pusha T's credibility when it comes to Pusha T acting as if he cared about the ghostwriting allegations, because that's what initially Pusha was making it seem like he only cared about the whole ghostwriting thing. And Drake flipped it on his head and said, hey, if you rebuke me for this, what do you really think of Kanye West? And then he leaned into that angle, which I thought was a very good idea, because that was a good question. And Pusha T really never answered that question. Honestly, he really didn't answer it. He had, because ultimately he knows he has nothing to say about that, because as much as he's trying to clown Drake for it, Kanye is like pretty much the same thing, but on steroids, as far as using a bunch of people to just sort of milk their ideas and claim it as his own. Now, also, something that I feel like kind of falls into the realm of schoolyard dishes is when Drake referenced Pusha T's wife, which he did that to Kendrick too. I'll get to that later, but he referenced Pusha T's wife. It's almost like, I guess you could say now that's the equivalent of how back in the day people would do like yo mama jokes. But then when Pusha T responded, Pusha T came through with something that was, you could consider it like spilling tea, but also facts at the same time, where he talked about Drake having a secret child. Regardless of the fact that a bunch of media outlets had already broke that story months earlier, and regardless of Drake allegedly having a sneaker campaign that was going to allow him to introduce his son to the world, it still was just, for a lot of people, they didn't know. So it still was just like something that caught them off guard. Now, if story of Adidon wasn't a hit, like, so that really, he didn't really have that going in his favor. As far as lyrical prowess, it was a pretty solid song. Like, I don't think it was the best rapping he's done, honestly, but it was still pretty solid. As far as schoolyard disses, he definitely went that route, in my opinion, when he started talking about Drake's afro not napping enough, and just basically saying that Drake doesn't think he is black enough. As far as social media savviness, I don't believe. Actually, yes, I'm one thing I'm going to count as social media savviness is Pusha T finding that picture of Drake with the blackface, finding that and then putting that out there before Drake did, because Drake, after all them years, just never put it out there. And never reposted it. So it kind of caught people off guard to see that. I feel like that was definitely a good move, because then it changes how people view him, and all of a sudden it makes people view Drake in a different light, obviously, especially when it comes to the whole like blackness conversation. But yeah, all in all, and then also obviously Drake just pretty much forfeited that beef because allegedly Jay Prince told him not to respond. But I mean, either way, it was going to be hard for him to kind of come back from all that. Now, obviously, as far as the Kendrick and Drake beef, that was bigger than all of this. As like the angles that like Drake's strategy in this whole thing, I thought was pretty weird. Like parts of what he did, I thought made a lot of sense, but there were other parts of the beef where I feel like he kind of dropped the ball. To be honest with you, so I don't think there's anything wrong with him, like, making short jokes about Kendrick. If Kendrick is short, then Kendrick is short. Like at the end of the day, like I said, that would kind of fall into the schoolyard disses tier of the diss ammo that I'm talking about. But some angles that I feel like Drake either didn't use or just didn't use properly was rebuttaling the whole deadbeat conversation, because in Kendrick's disses, one of the things that he kept talking about, like on Meet the Grams, was calling Drake like a deadbeat dad. All one thing that Drake should have done, but for whatever reason Drake didn't do, is point out the hypocrisy of Kendrick acting as if he cares about deadbeat people being deadbeat fathers, but then in the same breath hopping on the song like that, with which features Future, one of the most infamous deadbeats of the past like 15 years. Like I thought that was hypocritical, honestly. And I feel like Drake could have touched on that more to kind of take away from the credibility of that angle that Kendrick was leaning on, but he chose not to. I feel like he chose not to because he was too scared about not being able to do a song with Future again, which I think is cowardly, but it is what it is. Like, but that's a major angle that I think he missed out on that would have really, really helped him. Because if you look at it, it doesn't make sense to make songs calling Drake a deadbeat, but Kendrick is in the same breath he's doing songs with Future, who is a notorious deadbeat with like 30 kids. Like that doesn't really make much sense to me. Another angle Drake kind of touched on that I think he should have leaned into a little more was the R. Kelly angle. As far as a couple years ago, for the people that don't know, Spotify had threatened to, they were talking about taking R. Kelly's music off of their platform because of all the, stories and stuff about R. Kelly. We all know about what R. Kelly was into. And allegedly, I don't remember if this was confirmed or not, but allegedly Kendrick, because they were going to, allegedly Spotify was thinking about taking R. Kelly and XXXTentacion's music down. And allegedly Kendrick was threatening to take his whole discography off if they did that, which to me I thought was very weird, because it's like, why are you going to that level to support him? And like it didn't really make much sense to me. Again, I don't remember if that was confirmed or not, but because Drake mentioned it the way he mentioned it on the Heart Part 6, I think that was actually what happened, but I don't know. But I still think he should have leaned into that even more, regardless of if it was true or not, because at this point, by the time you get to the Heart Part 6, he's pretty much on the ropes at this point, because Kendrick had already dropped Not Like Us. So I think he definitely should have leaned into that angle a lot more. Another angle that I think was extremely underrated that Drake, he kind of touched on, but it was only for like half of a bar, which to me just squandered a great opportunity, was kind of calling out the hypocrisy of survivor's remorse that Kendrick claimed he had, right? Because as we all know, in the past, Kendrick has mentioned how he felt like he has some sort of survivor's remorse for making it out of Compton. And, obviously, the other people didn't make it, right? Which, me personally, I'm not a big believer in the whole survivor's remorse thing. Like, if I made it and you didn't, that's not my problem. But if you're somebody who allegedly has that survivor's remorse, the easiest way to cure that survivor's remorse is to try to put as many people on from Compton as possible to help them climb out of that environment. But when you look at the past 15 years, Kendrick hasn't put anybody on from Compton. Like, the only person Kendrick has put on at all has been his cousin. You know what I mean? Like, Baby Keem is the only person he's put on in over a decade. I feel like Drake could have leaned on that a little bit more. And I also feel like that angle would have been very underrated, because it could have been really him killing two birds with one stone, because it also could have allowed him to kind of defend himself a bit against the culture vulture conversation, like on Not Like Us, when Kendrick says he's a colonizer. He could have leaned on that angle a bit just to say, hey, I've gone out of my way to help a lot of people get their foot in the door. whether you want to call it culture vulture, colonizer or not, I've helped a lot of people get their foot in the door, whereas Kendrick simply has not. Now, I'm not saying that this would have necessarily been effective. It just depends on how he would have used it. But I feel like, considering that this is the biggest rap beef of your life, you should be leaving all cards on the table and just, taking a shot at it to see if the listeners are willing to understand where you're coming from with that angle. But he really didn't lean into it like that. Another angle I think Drake could have touched on, but he didn't. And this would have been more of a defensive angle, which, depending on the situation, I don't think is always a good idea to go on the defensive, especially too early. But by the time the Heart Part 6 came out, I think he definitely should have went at this angle, which is the angle of actually saying, hey, why is my blackness questioned? Now, look, does Drake want to be black? I have no idea. I'm not here to have that conversation about culture vulture and this and that. That's another conversation. But if I was Drake in that situation, or if I was on his team, I would have flipped the script and then questioned, hey, why are you trying so hard to question my blackness when there's more than one black experience? And the reason I say that is because I notice a lot of people on the internet, they seem to think that it's not okay for Drake to parade his dad around and because his dad was black. But in my head, I'm like, well, if he hid his dad to the side and only showed his mom, yeah, I would say he's trying to be white. So I don't understand why him showing his dad is automatically considered a problem. And then also you have a lot of fans who they seem to not want to accept Drake because not only is Drake not American, but also Drake doesn't come from like this super rough background, which to me I think speaks to a bigger issue because you have a lot of people. I say all the time that a lot of people's perception of what a rapper is very warped. Like a lot of people in their minds, they feel as though if you're a rapper, then automatically you got to come from you got to come from the hood and you have to be somebody in the streets committing crimes and there's so much more. There's so much more to music than that. And there's so much more to people's lives than that. A lot of people don't go down that route, and it's low key. It's low key racist for people to assume that that automatically has to be a route. Even if you're a black person, that's low key racist to assume that this black rapper had to be out here doing all this dirt, and that's why he started rapping. Like that's and it's a shame, but it is what it is. At the end of the day, you have a lot of people that perceive blackness through the lens of poverty, not realizing there's plenty of black people who grew up in the suburbs and don't have a concept of poverty. Now, I don't think, based on the way Drake handled this beef, I don't think Drake would have really been able to go at that angle, to be honest with you. It's a simple angle, but it's an angle that it's a little bit nuanced, and I don't think he was going to really handle it the best way possible, honestly. But as far as to switch to the story to Kendrick's side, what Kendrick did right, as far as like my tiers of like the ammo you could use in a diss song, I feel like Kendrick pretty much hit every single angle that you could possibly hit, honestly, for better or for worse. As far as like hit making ability, Not Like Us is a hit record. He did what we all thought Drake was gonna do, which was put out the biggest hit of them all, but Kendrick ended up pulling a Uno reverse card and he did it first. As far as facts, he brought up the fact that Drake was signed to, that Drake doesn't have any business talking about Kendrick's bad record deal when he is also signed to a bad record deal. As far as like the tea/gossip culture, he alleged that Drake is hiding a daughter. Now, is Drake hiding a daughter? I don't know. But hey, they're throwing it out there. He's also hinted at exposing more ghostwriter allegations, right? Like many people speculate that Daylight's the one that really wrote Drake's song back to back, and that may be the true reason that Kendrick said your best work is a light pack on like that. Like again, obviously, as far as lyrical prowess, like Kendrick, did a phenomenal job throughout this rap beef. As far as social media savviness, I feel like Kendrick and his team made a very smart decision to allow all content creators to use the diss songs in their YouTube videos without having their content be flagged. As far as track record, Kendrick has, and this kind of bleeds into the who people are rooting for piece, right? A lot of people like Kendrick more than Drake. A lot of rap purists prefer Kendrick more than Drake. So that already puts Kendrick in a space where a lot more people are on his side. As far as schoolyard disses, he made fun of, Drake having braids, Drake not thinking he's black enough, Drake not thinking his hair's napping enough, right? Like all of that stuff, then, as well as all the other disses he made. But, and then even to get back to the whole tea/gossip factor in all this, he also threw it out there that he doubled down on the potential of Drake, allegedly messing with kids or liking kids, which obviously people aren't going to be okay with. He even brought up the fact that when he was breaking down Drake's crew, he's like, "Hey, Baca got a weird case. Why is he around?" That's an excellent question. Why is Baca around? He got a weird case. As far as then, he also another thing that Kendrick did that was right when it comes to bringing up facts was he actually broke down Drake's relationships with a lot of artists, specifically in Atlanta, and he reframed how he looked at it. And he even went a step beyond just calling him a culture vulture and just straight up calling him a colonizer by saying, "Hey, you only went to Future when you needed to have those club hits, and you only went to Little Baby when you was trying to get your Atlanta lingo up." So I thought, again, I didn't spend a whole lot of time talking about what Kendrick did right, but Kendrick did pretty much 90% of what I think somebody would have to do in order to beat somebody as popular as Drake. Whereas Drake, I only think Drake did maybe 40 to 50% of what he could have done to give himself a better chance. All in all, did Drake ever really stand a chance in this? Probably not, if we're being honest. Like, this was beating Kendrick was going to be a tall task. And I don't think, not only do I think, as far as ammo, I don't think Drake approached it right, because Drake tried to come with the angle of saying Kendrick beats his wife, and I don't know if that's true or not. Maybe he does. Maybe Kendrick does beat his wife. But if that's the case, you need to double down on that the way Kendrick is doubling down on calling you a pedophile. He only would mention Kendrick beating his wife here and there. He also alleged that Dave Free is the secret father of one of Kendrick's children. That's a crazy reach, and in order to make that believable, you would have to go very far to make that believable. I mean, you would have to hire like a private investigator and have that private investigator find a way to get a hold of Kendrick, Dave Free, Kendrick's wife, Kendrick's baby mama, and the child's DNA, and just run a bunch of DNA tests and then post the DNA test. You would have to go that far, and I don't think Drake was ready to go that far. So I don't know if it was really worth it to bring that specific angle up. And I also don't even like the way that Drake approached dropping these songs, because my perspective is, for something this serious, for a beef of this magnitude, you need to come through with the perspective of, hey, I may need to drop 30 songs all summer, 30, 40, 50, however many songs. I may need to drop 2 to 3 songs a week for the rest of the year. You need to have that much of a stash. See, Kendrick, I do believe Kendrick came with that approach of having a stash. Whereas Drake, I think Drake was planning on wrapping this up in 2 songs. And to me, I feel like that's kind of underestimating his opponent, which I don't think is smart, honestly. Like, because you could tell on Family Matters when he kept saying, "Hey, I'm about to go on vacation. This is over for anybody calling it right." And, like, he kept talking as if he was like about to just drop this bomb and then leave it. And I'm like, well, it's not really that simple. You may have to drop and more bombs. And I don't think he was really prepared for that. Whereas Kendrick obviously was. Like, I think Drake's best chance would have been just like how Metro and Future put out like two back-to-back albums, just two compilation albums where people just dissing you nonstop. I think Drake should have just put out like Scary Hours 3 or whatever, just put out a whole EP and then put those songs on the EP. But either way, it still was just, like I said, just a very fascinating battle to watch. Let me know what you guys think about the whole situation. Do you guys think Drake ever stood a chance in this, or do you think he was pretty much dead on arrival? Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section below.